So basically, the last 6 years of Nick Diaz's life have been spent going to club openings as a guest and getting very drunk. That is allegedly what the case was. But yeah, it was a bit of an obsession online for a while because apparently he didn't drink before he met Ronda Rousey, and then he was partying every night. And it was interesting because you'd watch it and you go, well, fuck it, he's living his best life and he's earned a lot of money. Let him. But now that he's coming back to fighting, it does make you wonder. Especially with this weight issue, this dude used to be in prime condition year round, and now he's was 6 days out of the fight. Well, it was yesterday, so 6 days out of the fight. He asks for the weight to be changed from welterweight to middleweight. Now, that's all kinds of suspect because we know that, like, for big fights, the UFC will get the guys to agree a catch weight. You're basically agreeing a catch weight if you're agreeing moving up in weight anyway, when the contract was signed for 170. So to try and take it right up to 185 off that leads me to believe that the man was a long way off weight. Now, for other people, I'd probably be like, what a dick move. I suspect you were trying to come in heavy anyway. I don't know if you were even trying to make the weight. But Robbie Lawler, granted, this is all through the Vaseline lens of Dana White's story, but Dana White said that Nick wanted the fight changed. Robbie hasn't actually agreed with it yet. If you're Robbie Lawler, and this is the case, I'm saying, like, you shouldn't agree to that because it's fishy as fuck. You've been on point trying to get your weight down. This guy might not have even been doing that. You've been draining yourself. But more than that, it's a total dick move because he's put Lawler in this position. I mean, it's the same with a lot of fights where someone comes in knowing that they're going to miss weight or whatever and ask for a catch fight. You've put someone in a position where if they don't fight this fight now, they don't have money for, if you rescheduled the fight, which would be the smart thing to do, reschedule, because like if you were doing it middleweight, you go, okay, cool, I want to come in at middleweight. I don't want to be draining myself down to welterweight and then just go, oh no, I can have water again. But if you scheduled this like a month later, it's still a month that Robbie Lawler's not getting paid. So it's super douchey to put him in that position. And I'm saying that through this story where Nick is the guy asking for the higher weight. If it was Robbie and Nick was the one being forced to take the fight, I'd say that Robbie was the douche. It's the weight stuff is one of my pet peeves because, like, you can be against weight cutting and be like, oh, we shouldn't have it anyway, but these guys do it over and over and over again. It becomes very suspect when you come in like 7 pounds heavy. You're like, oh no, well, please take 20% of my purse and then I'm just going to beat you to death. Like Alex Oliveira did against poor old Will Brooks. But let's pretend that Nick Diaz is, just unfortunate. This is all. Let's ignore it. Actually, let's pretend that Nick Diaz is coming back and he's somewhat similar to how he left. I think one of the interesting things about how he left was that he left on a pretty good note. Obviously, all the drug drama and the suspension was very sour, but his last fight was actually pretty decent. He fought Anderson Silva. Silva was coming back from the losses to Weidman. It was just sort of like Anderson Silva's not getting another title fight anytime soon. Nick Diaz has just come off the loss to George St. Pierre and won't fight anyone except like people he wants to fight and for big money. So they put it together and it actually worked out pretty well. It was a good, entertaining fight. And Silva won the decision, but Diaz, walked forward, was the aggressor for most of the fight, and like never looked in trouble, and gave us some outlandish antics with the laying down on the floor and all that shit. But to walk down one of the division's best counter strikers and basically, well, the division above's best counter strikers and basically disregard his strikes was pretty baller. And this is where Nick Diaz becomes such an interesting character, because if you compare Nate Diaz and Nick Diaz, well, if you like take off the last two fights of Nick Diaz's career, GSP and Anderson Silva, Nate Diaz was the less successful Diaz. Didn't have world titles, didn't have the same appeal, particularly because this is back before the Conor McGregor stuff. But Nate Diaz had fought the better opposition consistently. Nate Diaz had lost fights, but he'd been in there with the best in the world. Whereas Nick Diaz, Much as you may not like to hear it, he was the prototype for MVP in Scott Coker's matchmaking. Scott Coker went and found him guys who were just going to stand and bang with him, and then if Nick was in any trouble at all, he'd just submit them. So you got to this point where people were genuinely considering him like an Alter X, another king. You had the GSP and Diaz dynamic, and people were like, well, those two are about equal. And then when he did finally get into the UFC, it was back into the UFC. It was a win over BJ Penn, swollen up welterweight BJ Penn, really at the start of the Great Decline. And then Carlos Condit beat him by split decision in what was supposed to be a title eliminator. Well, actually, it was for the interim championship. But Carlos Condit went on to fight GSP. Nick sat out for a year, and then they gave him the title fight anyway. And if you watch the GSP fight, there's some interesting stuff in it from Diaz, but he does basically get, dominated for the entire fight. The Condit one is interesting because that's obviously very contentious. Well, actually, it wasn't a split decision. It was just it was a unanimous decision, but there was a lot of controversy around it. I think I wrote at the time, if you're the aggressor and you're not landing anything, if you're the aggressor and you're not really doing anything, all you're doing is dictating the pace at which the opponent is kicking your ass, which was a good line to get people riled up in those days when. Well, what was that? 2012. So I was just sort of starting out. But yes, Condit did what you should do against Nick Diaz and Nate Diaz. They both have that very side-on boxing stance, and both are very susceptible to you running around their lead leg and kicking them in the lead leg. And Anderson Silva did it against Diaz too, and everyone's done it against Nate. But in terms of his actual skills, what he brings to the table, the reason that Nick Diaz is absolutely beloved is that he has an incredibly entertaining style of fighting. I was watching this Countdown episode, and I was going, oh, okay, I'm not super hype about this fight. And then they showed about 30 seconds of highlights of Nick Diaz, and I was like, oh, yeah, I remember Nick Diaz. He was fucking great. The volume punching, the pressure fighting, the submissions when people dived for his hips because they'd get overwhelmed by him just walking them down. The constantly losing first rounds and letting the other guy tire himself out on your face. There's not really been anyone like him. The pity patter punching that everyone loves because you can call it pity patter, but eventually it kills people. The body shots, he actually, when he sits down on punches, they're actually legit. The one he finished Frank Shamrock with was amazing. The ones that he was landing on Cyborg Santos. I think one of the interesting things about his style is that, both of them actually, Robbie Lawler and Nick Diaz. Sorry, I keep saying Nate. I do know the difference, but I will keep misspeaking because it's been 5 years since I've had to talk about Nick Diaz. The difference, the thing that both of them have in common is that both are very right-hand heavy southpaws, which is a little bit unusual. I mean, it was unusual back then. It's still unusual now, but the typical Southpaw 101 is to try and score your left straight whenever possible, or your left overhand or whatever, because you've got your power hand there, the opponent's got their power hand there. It's a quick draw. The lead shoulder isn't in the way of the opponent's rear hand, or theirs isn't in the way of your rear hand. Right? But both Nick Diaz and Robbie Lawler love the right hook, and you could see that in their very first fight, which I rewatched again to get hype for this. But Lawler jumps in swinging his right hook. Nick leans back and throws his right hook and check hooks him. Nick had a decent jab, but it was mainly there to just annoy people and start him putting in those two-punch combinations. And it was very interesting because when he fought, he was a southpaw fighting GSP. GSP didn't fight a lot of southpaws. You didn't get to see all the issues that GSP had with other southpaws. And sorry, not GSP exclusively, but the TriStar Gym has had a lot of problems with guys who take away their jab. And if you fight, if GSP fought like Johnny Hendricks' lead hand was always on GSP's lead hand, constantly checking it, and then he's throwing big overhand lefts, he's slapping the hand down and throwing jabs. He was dominating that lead hand, and GSP's rear hand is like an afterthought. Same thing happened a few months later with Robbie Lawler versus Rory McDonald. Lawler actually much more comfortable hand fighting with people than Nick often is. With that being said, if you watch the last exchange of the Lawler-Diaz fight, the first one, the only one so far, the Diaz actually, he reaches out with his lead hand, because they're both southpaw. He reaches out with his right hand across onto the outside of Lawler's own lead hand. So his thumb's pointing down, he's grabbing on the outside of the wrist to cross himself. And Lawler immediately starts swinging at him, and he leans back and counterhooks him as Lawler's overextending. It's a really cool way to get Lawler opening up, because it's one of the things that, like, if you see people like in beginning kickboxing classes and things, they often start reaching their lead hand across for the opponent's lead hand to pull it down and try and land their rear hand. And it should stop working on good people, because you have to cross yourself up to do it. You have to take away your own lead hand to try and take away their lead hand. But there have been people who've had a lot of success with it. So Lorenz Larkin, another time for a Lorenz Larkin wank myself cross-eyed while I talk about Lorenz Larkin. But Lorenz Larkin does this great thing where he puts his lead hand on the outside of his opponent's lead hand, uses the lead shoulder to roll off punches and come back with punches of his own, and then he'll throw a lead leg switch kick into the body off that too. And of course, the thing is, like, if the guy does let you grab his wrist like that, you can pull it down and punch him in the head. You know, you shouldn't be able to get away with it against good fighters. But if you do start reaching and grabbing their lead hand like that, they have to do something. So it was really cool watching that fight back, 17 years ago, and he did that. And really, the only person you see doing it now extensively is Lorenz Larkin. Bernard Hopkins did it in a couple of his later fights too. You see it more in boxing from very crafty old timers, but that's not to say like it's an old time technique. You just see it from dudes who've been around forever because they'll fuck around with it. But yes, both these guys super into their lead hand hitting, which actually makes for a more compelling matchup when you've got Southpaw versus Southpaw, because you're in a closed stance matchup. You're back to where the lead hand is the most important again. Now, if you're Robbie Lawler, like, he has slowed down so much, and he's basically like he's starting to look like Tyron Woodley, where he can't pull the trigger and he lets people back him up. But your game plan here for Lawler should be fairly obvious. Kick the shit out of that lead leg, because the way that Diaz stands, so that he can lean back and throw the check hook, so that counter right hook, whatever the fuck you want to call it, or pour in with that jab, is very side on. Lead foot almost always turned in. And that means if you kick it, yeah, he might be able to grin and take it. It's not a case of like you're going to shut his leg down. Maybe if you hit some good calf kicks, he can make his foot go to sleep. But what you can do is you can knock his balance out every time you kick him, because his feet are on almost a line and his toes are pointing the same direction as the kick, so his foot will probably always slip out. People lost their mind about leg jabs with Carlos Condit, but it didn't take much for him to tap Diaz's leg, the foot to slip, and him to run out the side door before Diaz was able to pivot and face him. That's the other thing about that very long, narrow bladed stance. You have to do a lot of pivoting, and pivoting can be quite slow. Nick Diaz is a pressure fighter, so Nate Osman fights as a pressure fighter, but he wants to walk people to the cage. He wants to land lots of punches and land body shots and flatten them out. But he does so from a stance that is the opposite of what you'd want for that. If you watch good ring cutters in boxing or kickboxing or MMA even, there aren't an awful lot of them, but if you watch good ring cutters, the idea is that they square their stance slightly so that they can hit with both hands well, but also so that they can, if the opponent starts stepping to the outside of their lead foot, they can just pull their foot back and push it out to the side. Whereas if you stand very side on, you have to turn around that lead foot and face people. And when you're, writing this Jose Aldo piece at the moment, all about pivoting and its various roles in fighting and the little pivots that aren't really seen. But if you're doing big pivots around your lead foot, you are very much following someone rather than cutting them off effectively. So yeah, if you're Lawler, circle out, kick the lead leg, throw in the calf kick. This could be one of those fights where people are like, oh my God, he's been away for too long. The calf kick, he doesn't know about it. Even though low kicks have always been a big issue for both Diaz's. And if you're Nick, I'd say get on him early, because Lawler has been really struggling to pull the trigger. One of the things that was really interesting about the Matt Brown-Robbie Lawler fight back in the day, I was really excited for that, was to see how Robbie Lawler dealt with someone else putting pressure on him. Because there was, it's not the same sort of pressure, but like Melvin Manhoef was running him ragged, and it was basically like a throw and hope right hand that saved Robbie Lawler in that fight. But I was fascinated to see the Matt Brown matchup And then in the very opening seconds of the fight, Robbie Lawler lets Matt Brown come to him and loads up the biggest right hook of his life to crack Matt Brown. And that just turned Matt Brown into like a try and stand on the outside and land points kickboxer for the rest of the fight. He just made him fight a completely different fight by showing him a big counter early. And I don't know if that'll work against someone like Nick Diaz, who, for all his lacking fundamentals in certain areas of his game, takes a phenomenal shot and isn't scared of getting hit. Some of Nick Diaz's best work has been like getting people to the fence, letting them grab the double collar tie, where they're like, "Oh, I'm going to knee your face off, Nick," and then he'll just hammer their body, keep putting his forearm across their face and turning his shoulders to throw their arms off and come back with punches. He did it to Daly, did it to Santos, watch those old Strikeforce and Elite XC fights, because he just does it all the time. Like, gives people the double collar tie, encourages them to like try and hit him as hard as they can, and smacks their body while they do it. Very good clinch striker, actually, in a sport lacking clinch strikers. And not a clinch striker in the same way that my boy Nchukwi or many of the other great clinch strikers have been. Not big on knees too much. Did do good work with elbows, actually. Really, it was always really fun watching him flow elbows into body shots and vice versa. I think another thing that I have always said about the Diaz is I like to see people try and hit them in the body. And this has been a theme with guys who, well, I mean, it's a theme overall in combat generally. Lots of guys gravitate towards techniques offensively that they have found difficult defensively. Particularly with aggressive fighters. They, it's interesting because it works the other way. Like, very gifted defensive fighters tend to work in like very tricky, half-hearted, semi-committed sort of attacks. Think of like Floyd Mayweather and his body jab being like his main power punch. But very gifted offensive fighters tend to find things that have given them trouble and then just go hard as hell on them. One of the old examples I used to like was like Bas Rutten. Got leg locked a few times, went hard as hell, like learning leg locks and attacking them all the time. He should roll for the knee bar. I don't know why I made him Russian, but that was Dragunov saying roll for the knee bar. But the Diaz brothers love the body shots. They're one of the few. They're some of the rare fighters in MMA who actually commit to working the body and correctly value them as attritive weapons, rather than hit him with a good left hook to the body. Oh, I didn't get my one shot knockout. I was hoping for that. Well, back to throwing at the head all the time. The body work is valuable as a attritive weapon through the fight, and the Diaz brothers value it as that. But I've always suspected that if they get hit in the body, they also don't like that. And if they got typically they have such great gas tanks, they're in such good condition, you really want to take that away a bit, and kick in the legs to remove their movement or further hamper their very slow movement already, and hitting the body to slow them down might be a good idea. And Robbie Lawler, like some of his performances, he really goes like all over. If you watch the Hendricks fights, Robbie Lawler is beating him up and down. It's leg kicks. He's throwing fucking triangle kicks, throwing the snap kick that comes up on a sort of like 45-degree angle to the body off his lead leg. He's hitting the body with body shots. He does value them sometimes, but he tends to work on whims. And I think where he used to get like tunnel vision focusing on swinging at the head, I think nowadays he's got like too cautious and is sort of standing back and letting people come in on him. But I think if you get him into a firefight, he will probably ignore the body altogether, which is a bit of a shame in this one. But if you remember both the Hendricks fight and the Koscheck fight, when the guy's on his knee, like he sprawls on the guy and he just starts hammering him with elbows to the kidney. And I can't think of much worse than being elbowed in the kidney. And you don't ever see it any other time, but he did it to those two guys. Like, he knocked Koscheck out with punches from his knees, but basically because he'd winded him with these elbows to the kidney. But the Hendricks one, Hendricks holds onto that leg way too long, just being battered in the kidney. One of the great things about MMA is that you're allowed to smash people in the kidney. Because boxing was like, no, that really hurts. Knock that shit off. There was actually a Sugar Ray Robinson fight. I think it was Hecht. He fought a German, and I think it was during his European tour. and people were really angry because he beat this guy with like repeated kidney punches as the dude held him, and it turned out that like in that jurisdiction in German boxing, kidney punching hadn't been outlawed yet, whereas it had been illegal for like 10-15 years in America. So he was like, I want to try kidney punching someone. But yeah, I mean, before we wrap this up, I mean, it's worth mentioning that Nick Diaz, for all his like appearance of just wanting to bang bro, pretty intelligent fighter a lot of the time. Not afraid to push people to the fence and try and do a bit of attritive work, slow him down a bit. If you remember his fight with Zaromskis, he comes out in that fight and like it was, oh, these two are just gonna bang. He picks up a single leg, runs Zaromskis to the fence, and just starts kneeing one of his legs about 50 times just to slow him down a bit and and set up the threat of possibly being wrestled. So yeah, I mean, I'm erring very much. This is the thing, like it's been so long, you don't know with Nick Diaz, and the inability to make the weight is pretty suspect. But stylistically, with what Robbie Lawler's been losing to lately, I mean, I'm not saying that Nick Diaz is Colby Covington, just going to keep diving on double legs along the fence, but I mean, Rafael dos Anjos did it in a pretty technical kickboxing match. It wasn't like inscrutable pressure. He just sort of walked Robbie Lawler to the fence and kept beating him up. And Robbie didn't do anything, it was, and Magny did much the same thing. So yeah, this looks like one of those ones that's just sort of like perfect for Nick Diaz to get a win and be like, hey, he's back. But like I said, it's been 5 years, 6 years. It's been 17 years since the first fight. Maybe Robbie's been stewing on it and worked out some secret technique he's going to throw out there at Nick. But there's not really a need for secret techniques. It's low kicks and circling, and then that's about the anti-Diaz game plan, and do anything that you're good at on top of that. Well, there you go. I was like, what a stupid fight. No one cares about this fight. Why would anyone care about this fight? I don't care about this fight. And then I started talking about it, and now I care about this fight. Oh, this is the thing about Nick Diaz. He is so fun. And, Robbie Lawler is so fun when he's on, but I think he is pretty much in a sort of a Woodley light phase at the moment. But yeah, the thing about Nick Diaz is he is so fun. And then I was just looking through Twitter while I was talking about this fucking fight. And my boy, the Grabaka hitman, Kaposa, he tweeted, I forgot about this part of Nick Diaz fight week, wondering if the fight will happen or not. All part of the experience. Yeah, I mean, it was all part of the package, Sometimes he'd turn up, sometimes he wouldn't. And it was very unprofessional. It was very unfair on the people who'd signed to fight him, because he's the, he is a draw. And the people who are fighting him normally want money. So they don't really get a choice. They don't get to fuck around like he does. But yeah, I'll be watching, and I feel no shame about that. It should be fun. Hopefully it's fun. To be honest, like Matt Brown versus Carlos Condit was pretty fucking fun. I was very down on that fight because I'm like, I don't want to see old dudes just who should have retired ages ago fighting each other. And wouldn't you know it, was actually really fun. So maybe they're at the level where they are competitive for each other, and it's going to be a good one.